Okay, this is the second video for the immune system, and today we're going to be going over the steps of the immune system response. Okay, kind of just a review of what we talked about last time. We talked about the parts of the immune system. We talked about what infectious diseases are, and that you can get them from somebody else. They're pathogens, say they're bacteria, viruses, or another microorganism. Non-infectious diseases you cannot get from somebody else. That's like cancer. We kind of mentioned COVID, but also that we don't have to be afraid. And then we talked about how the immune system is everywhere. We have our first line of defense, which is the skin and the mucus and the platelets. And then we talked about the lymphatic system, which is has the lymph and lymph nodes, and we talked a little bit about white blood cells, and that we have different organs that help us with our immune system, the thymus gland, the spleen, and the tonsils. Those are just some of them, but they're really important ones. Now we're going to talk about how, okay, if something gets past our first line of defense, if it gets into our skin, if it gets into maybe an opening like our nose or our eyes or our mouth, then what happens? What happens? What does our immune system do? All right, so again, we're going to use military terms because one, I think it really is a good representation of what is happening in our bodies, but also because it's easy to remember, okay? So I say first step, the step one, I call it hand-to-hand combat. And this is why. Because in step one, there's something called a macrophage, and it engulfs the invading pathogen. Well, what does it mean to engulf? It means that here is the macrophage. And the macrophage, I have the definition here. It's a large white blood cell that engulfs pathogens, okay? So it's just a cell. This is the cell, okay? It's a white blood cell. And engulfing, it is basically eating them up, okay? Like basically swallowing them and then rendering them useless. They're not going to do anything after that, okay? Another thing you guys should know is white blood cells, we're not going to call them that because there's a lot of new words and I don't want to bombard you with a bunch of new words. But white blood cells are actually called leukocytes. Okay, leukocytes, that's what they're called. So you might see that word in the future. It just means white blood cell. Okay, if anybody knows anybody who has a cancer called leukemia, leukemia is a cancer of the leukocytes, which are white blood cells, okay? That's just something, so maybe you'll remember it in the future, okay? Now, the macrophages, they will try to do this at first, but sometimes there are more pathogens than the macrophages can handle. So when that happens, just like in a battle, if you're going against something and then there's too many people, what do? You call for reinforcements, okay? And that's exactly what happens. The macrophages call for reinforcements. What they do is they stick pieces of the pathogen. Pieces of the pathogen are called antigens. Okay, so remember pathogen, antigen. It has like the G-E-N at the end. That's maybe how you can remember it. Okay, so it sticks pieces of them, pieces of the pathogen, to the surface. So these little orange things are supposed to represent the pathogen, okay? And so what they do is they get pieces of the pathogen and they stick them to the surface. Okay, well, why do they do that? Because when they do this, it gives a signal to the rest of the immune system. It's basically like calling for reinforcements. It's saying, hey, immune system, I need help, okay? We need to let the rest of the body know we need help. This is not something I can handle by myself. So that's what they're doing, okay? That's why they're doing this. Okay, and so then when they call for help, then it's something I call the troops are activated, okay? So they call for help, they're activating the troops, okay? So step 3 is the antigens activate helper T cells. Okay, so the calling of reinforcements, they're calling the helper T cells. Okay, these guys are the helper T cells. Okay, again, this is the macrophage. Here are the pathogens. So they're the bad guys. They're the enemy invaders. Okay, and then here are the little pieces of them, which in step 2 was because they called for reinforcements. They sent a signal out. Well, now they are getting their troops. Their troops are the helper T cells. What the helper T cells do is they divide very, very quickly in this step. They increase their number. They're saying, come on, troops, let's multiply. Let's get a very big number of us to go and fight the enemy. Okay? All right, so then in step 4, I call it chemical warfare. They decided a strategy that they are going to use chemicals. Okay, so the helper T cells release chemicals. And there's a lot of them at this point because remember, they multiplied. Okay, and these chemicals released help fight infection. And then there's another new cell called B cells, and they multiply. In addition, so there's a lot of stuff that happens in this step. So chemicals are released from the helper T cells, B cells multiply, and then these chemicals that are released trigger a response by killer T cells. Okay, well they sound scary and they're helpful. They're our immune system's killer T cells. They're like the Navy SEALs, right? They're specialized forces. Okay, so we have, remember, this is our helper T cell. Our B cells are starting to multiply and they're calling the killer T cells. Just over here, I have what B cells are. B cells are a type of white blood cell, because that's what we're dealing with. Immune system, we're talking about white blood cells. Okay, white blood cells mature in the bones, and they make antibodies. Okay, I think we might have mentioned this last time we were talking. So again, white blood cells, that's another name. Another name for white blood cells is leukocytes. Okay, so they are a type of white blood cells. They mature in the bones and they make antibodies. Okay, we're going to talk more about antibodies in a minute. Okay, killer T cells, they're a type of T cell, and T cells are white blood cells as well. And what they do is they kill any cell that is infected with pathogens. So the killer T cells, again, they're like the Navy SEALs, they're like the Army Rangers. They go out and they kill the pathogens. Okay, any cells that get infected, they're going to kill them. Okay, because those infected cells are going to end up hurting the body. So big step here. Okay, so far we've had hand-to-hand combat. The macrophages will just try to engulf them. When that doesn't work, they call for reinforcements. We have the antigens that have attached to the outside, and that sends a signal to all the other cells for help. Okay, then we get the helper T cells that come in. They cause the B cells to multiply, and they call the killer T cells, which then kill the pathogens. Okay? All right, so now we're in full-blown war. What happens next? Next, I like to call the reassess and reload. This is the time where in war, where they say, okay, how is it going? What can we do next? And let's reload our forces. Let's give them some rest, maybe send some new troops out. And so in this step, what happens in the body is the killer T cells multiply to attack the pathogen, and the B cells make antibodies. Okay, so the killer T cells, they are starting to multiply. Those are these guys here. So again, here's the macrophage. Okay, here are the antigens, which are parts of the pathogen. Here are the killer, or not killer. These are the helper T cells. And then the killer T cells, and now what they're doing is the B cells are making antibodies. Okay? Antibodies, this is the first introduction. What are antibodies? They are proteins that attach to specific pathogens. Again, we mentioned them before, we're mentioning them now, and we're going to talk about them more in our next presentation where we're going to talk specifically about immunity. Okay, so this is just the process of how we get rid of the pathogens. But immunity is something different. Immunity is something that we can fight things in the future, okay? And we're going to talk about that a different day. All right, so that's our recess and reload step. I also wanted to mention that antibodies, before we get too much into them, they are very specific. So I don't know if you can see in this picture, but it kind of looks like a Y, okay? Kind of think of that. Okay, so over here, the antigens, which are parts of the pathogen, are kind of shaped like a triangle. Well, no, these antibodies, what they do is they kind of make a puzzle piece. And if you can see, like that puzzle piece will fit onto that antigen. Okay, so what they're doing is they're completing the other piece of the puzzle. Okay, they're very specific, and there's a reason why they want to make a piece that fits to that puzzle. Okay, and remember this because we're going to talk about it a bunch later. But let's move on in our next step. There's 8 steps altogether, by the way. There's not like 100, okay? All right, so we reassessed and reload. Now we have a plan. We're going to attack, okay? Again, step 6 I call ground forces attack, and I call it this because what happens is the killer T cells are beginning to destroy the pathogen infected cells, okay? So here we go. If you look down here, here are some cells. And these cells have been infected by the pathogen. You can see the little pieces of the pathogen in them. Well, the killer T cells now are going to go and kill them. Well, how do they know to kill those cells? Because the antibodies fit in those cells. Okay, so there's a lot of cells. Okay, think like trillions of cells, and so that's why they're able to like infiltrate the body and basically tell the rest of the body what is going on. Where is the problem area? Where are these bad guys? Okay, it's a very quick communication from our cells to our brain back to our cells. Okay. After the ground forces attack, the next part of the plan is airstrikes, okay? And so this is the part in war where our planes are really helpful because we can just very specifically target a specific place where there's a bunch of enemy, and we don't even have to go down there. So what happens in the body? The antibodies attach to the pathogens, and they are marking them for other immune system cells to destroy them. Okay, so what's happening here is our antibodies are now going to work. Look at them. So these are the antibodies, remember? They are going and they're attaching to all the pathogens. So they're basically putting a big red dot. So in war, it's like, I don't know, you kind of think of like a red dot in the area where the enemy is. They're putting red dots so they're easier to see. Okay, they're easier for our immune system cells to find. And when they mark them, we don't even have to wait for the killer T cells to kill them, because remember, the killer T cells are the specialized forces. All of the immune system cells, if they're marked, they can all kill them. So now, or I should say destroy those cells. So now we're getting faster and we're getting more effective in eliminating the enemy. Okay? All right, last step, step 8, we have victory and we make a future plan. Okay? So there's kind of 2 parts to this. So when a battle ends, there's a victory. Yay, the enemy is defeated. But also, we want to make sure that in the future, this enemy doesn't get an upper hand on us again. Okay? So in the body, what happens is when the pathogens are all gone, there is something called suppressor T cells. Okay? And there's a bunch of other names that you can call suppressor T cells, but they all have the same regulatory T cells, other people call them, but suppressor T cells I like because the word actually gives it away. Suppressor T cells turn off all of the T cells and B cells. Okay, so what that means is those cells that now we're going and killing our body cells, the reason why they were killing our body cells was because they were infected. Well, what we don't want them to do is to continue to kill healthy cells. Okay? And anytime you hear of like an autoimmune disease or an autoimmune disorder, what is happening is our own immune system, these B cells and C cells, or B cells and T cells, are continuing to attack healthy cells. And that becomes a problem, and that's why it's a disease on its own. Again, that's not a disease you can get from anybody, but so if there's an immune disorder, that's what's going on. Okay, so the suppressor T cells are very, very important because we don't want the immune system to get out of hand. Okay. Also, just a side note, allergic reactions. This is very similar. Like allergic reactions is also when our immune system is overreacting. Okay. you can go really into depth with that, but I just want to mention that quick. Okay, so in our body, let me read this step. Step 8, the pathogens are gone. So also the memory cells remain to respond if the same pathogen invades again. So during this whole process, our body makes memory cells. And this is, again, for the future plan. We don't want the same enemy to get an upper hand on us. We want to learn our lesson. So the memory cells are our body's way of remembering this specific enemy, this specific pathogen. So that way next time this enemy comes into our body, this pathogen, this bacteria or virus, our body is very quicker to respond. We know how to handle it. And now you probably won't get sick. Okay? The only reason you get sick the first time is because our body has never seen it before, so we have to figure it out. Okay? Just like in war, we have to figure out the enemy. Okay? So those are the steps. There are 8 steps to getting rid of once, like let's say a pathogen gets through the first line of defense. This is the second thing that happens. Our immune system has a very specific process for handling it. And it's amazing. You guys probably think this is absolutely amazing. These are tiny, tiny little cells. It's all God's way of designing our bodies to be wonderfully made. So we don't have to be afraid even of viruses and bacteria because God has designed our bodies. Of course, I want you guys to be cautious. There are things that we've learned in medicine that can help us be cautious of these things. But our bodies are also very, 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 very intelligent. Our cells are intelligent because God has made us intelligent beings, and we're made in the image of Him. So just remember, when we look at this stuff, I want you guys to look back at Jesus and see the wonder that He has made us, and to look at Him and say that He is an amazing God. Okay? All right, that's it for this section. Stay tuned next week because we have one more section on immunity. And we are, just to let you guys know, we're barely touching the surface. If you guys are interested in learning a lot more about the immune system, I can send you some videos or some links because you can get really into it and it's really interesting. But I want you to know a little bit about it before you leave 7th grade. All right? Have a good day.